Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Welcome to this episode of the Software People Stories. My guest today is Pankaj Rai. Pankaj leads the strategy, digital and innovation teams at WellsFargo, where he is responsible for creating a culture of 3 E's: effectiveness, efficiency, and experience. In this conversation, he talks about his childhood and various things that he learned from different people in his network, where he says the network selects you from his dad, from his boss, as well as colleagues, and making career transitions without having a fear of failure. We go on to talk about the importance of inclusion, diversity, collaboration, and a whole variety of topics, and his advice for not only IT career aspirants and mid-career professionals, but anyone, including his own daughter, the 3C framework that later got expanded to 5 C's of curiosity, compassion, conviction, creativity, and communication. Listen on. Hi Pankaj, welcome to the Software People Stories. I know we've been playing telephone tags and all that, so finally we get to talk. And the more I hear about you and the more I heard from you, I think there are a lot of things that we can cover, and I'm sure we will cover. And as usual, we'll start from the beginning, and nothing as great as a self-introduction. So if you can start with telling our listeners your background and then how you got into where you are now.
Yeah, Shiv. So let me start from the very beginning. In fact, a day before the beginning. So the day before I was born, Mrs. Gandhi privatized all Indian banks. And on the day that I was born, Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. So I have to say that I sort of came into the world on very sort of prophetic moments in history. But that
Giant
was
leap for mankind.
Giant leap for mankind, yeah. So that was, of course, 51 years ago. It's been a long while since then. And I grew up initially in Gorakhpur, which is a small factory town. My dad used to work in a fertilizer factory and they had a colony. So my initial worldview was, I have to say, quite cosmopolitan, which when I look back, I realized. Because when people hear Gorakhpur, they say, oh, so you are from UP, so you know this and you know that. And I said, inside the factory town, there was no UP. It was all of India. There were, Sikhs, and there were Malayalis, and there were Tamilians, and there were North Indians, and there were all kinds of people. And of course, at that point of time, I didn't realize that I was fortunate enough to have lived my early life in a very cosmopolitan area, despite being in a northern Indian city. And I sometimes think that I wish we had more Jamshedpurs and more such colonies where people from all over sort of come together, and hopefully the world would be a much more better place when people appreciate each other from the very beginning. But anyway, then of course, dad got promoted, moved to Delhi, the big bad world of Delhi, which is where I spent the next 25 years, education and college and so on. And then briefly I was in Singapore and then in Bangalore. In terms of my, education and professional journey, I think most people from our generation were told by our parents that you either choose to be an engineer or a doctor. And in my case, my dad himself had a very, interesting background. And, sometimes you realize how much you are shaped by your parents' lives and their aspirations. So my dad was, one of those, if some of you have seen the movie Super 30, he was that type of a person who grew up in a very small village in UP and then made it to IIT Bombay, and knowing only one language, Bhojpuri. So he learned Hindi and English while in Bombay. So that was his sort of, you can say, rags to not necessarily riches, but to sort of some getting out of the village and getting into a better position, so to say, story. So clearly from that background, his aspiration was that his children should have a good life and should get a good education and all of that. So me and my brother from a very early age knew that we had to go into this place called IIT where my dad had gone. And that is the only aim he has for us. And we didn't have any options. So anyway, so many people didn't know this, but even in Gorakhpur, we knew what IIT was and that we are supposed to get there. And to get there, you have to be really good in studies. And therefore, the conversation at home after school used to be that, why did you lose that 1 mark in maths? when I never lost a mark. I always got 100, and how can you guys lose a mark? So that was the kind of, background we all grew up in. So I was the guinea pig who was asked to take both biology and, engineering, so that I could either be an engineer or doctor. Who knows? My dad didn't want to take any chances. So I sat for all those exams. I also got admission to, medicine. But then clearly in my biology class, I used to dread it. The tadpole that I was dissecting would run away and I would get scared, all of that. So I realized that biology wasn't for me, and I took up engineering. My brother, of course, who came 2 years later, was smarter. He just chose mechanical drawing and didn't take biology, so he could take only half the exams. And and both of us, long story short, dad's aspirations came true. Both of us went to IIT Delhi, electrical engineering as well, although he was a mechanical engineer. So that has been the sort of early years. And then, of course, most people who are doing engineering used to go to either abroad and do masters, or then stay home and do MBA. And when I started writing my statements of purpose, which is what the US universities ask you to do, I realized that actually my purpose was not even to do electrical engineering, forget doing masters, when you start thinking about it. And then thankfully I got admission into an MBA college, and then I went and did my MBA from Ahmedabad. And there also I was quite lucky because I got just one admission. And the reason for that also was that MBA school those days, and probably these days also, conduct what they call group discussion. And I was a bit of a quiet person, so I just couldn't talk in any of those group discussions. I must have scored a nil in most of them, except Ahmedabad, where they said all of you have 2 minutes each. So everyone got a chance to speak. So thankfully, I got to just one of them. And after that, I went to a sort of a startup company. Startups wasn't a big thing those days, but this company called Feedback Ventures, which was started by alumnus from Ahmedabad itself. And there were some seniors who came and said, great company, and you should come here and you'll learn a lot. And this was back in 93 when Indian economy had just been liberalized. There was a lot of interest in new investments from outside. Also, Indian companies were expanding. So it was good. Couple of years we were advising founders on what should they do and so on and so forth. And then a friend of mine who was in ICICI said that, this is a great place. Why don't you, come here? I'll get you interviewed. And at that point in time, his boss, Sandeep Bakshi, who's now the MD of ICICI, he sort of interviewed and then hired me. And the first thing he said after I got hired was that, remember when you were in consulting, you could give any advice and the client is responsible for that. But we are in the business of lending. And we make 2 rupees on a good loan and lose 100 on a bad one. So remember, whatever advice you give, the odds are 50:1. So be careful. Just don't give any advice on who to lend money to. And we all know how many loans went bad in the financial sector. And we see so many of these founders waiting to be extradited from London and so on. So I was part of that original project financing world when Indian economy was growing. Everyone was putting up projects, and it was quite a good experience. You learn a lot. I tell people that when you lend money to people, you learn a lot. You'll get to know everything about them when you have to recover it. And we all learned all of those things. And then when I got married, I think the phraseology in ICICI used to be that they didn't pay too much. They were more of a government company. So, hey, you have to one day start earning and stop learning. Enough of learning. And then G Capital came along because there was another friend who was there, and he got me interviewed, and sort of doubled my salary and joined a multinational. It's another matter that the moment I left ICICI, it became a bank. Lots of people got shares, and all of them became very rich later on. But that is all, hindsight. So initially, all of those things you don't know. So G was great. I think one learned a lot about how a large multinational companies operates in hundreds of countries, and how do you run a large conglomerate? There was so many, I would say, a cultural element that I learned. Jack Welch used to be the leader in those days. He would talk about boundaryless behavior, leadership qualities. I still remember his 4 E's of leadership: energy, energize, edge, execute. There were so many things that I learned in G. Great company, including Six Sigma, which I ended up doing for 18 months as a black belt. So I learned a lot of things. And that company also made me think beyond financial services and beyond credit underwriting, which is what I used to do, because the Six Sigma rotation opened my eyes to doing so many other things. And therefore, my next job then was in Standard Chartered in the offshore world. Because G had also created an entity called JECIS, which is now called Genpact. And that whole offshoring activity was growing. And there's someone from G called Rumi Malhotra had gone to Standard Chartered, and someone introduced me to him, and he hired me, and I went to Stanchart and spent 6 months in Chennai and a year in Singapore. And then Rumi had come to Dell in Bangalore, and then he sort of called me over and I came to Dell, which is where I spent next 11 years. I have been here in Bangalore for now 15 years. And in those years, 7, 8, 9 years were probably spent in the data analytics field. And that was also happen chance. There was an expat, Jay Srinivas, an Indian guy who had set up the data analytics team. And he said, we want to do Dell Financial Services Analytics, and you have some banking background. Why don't you do DFS Analytics? And I said, yeah, let's try it out. And that was the time when analytics was not such a fashionable word, but by the time I joined, analytics has started to boom, and we ended up creating a great analytics team over there in Dell. Then again, a few friends had moved over to WellsFargo, and they said, this is a great place, it's growing, lots of new things, you've always been a banker, you can come back and do this. So that's where I've now been close to 5 years. So if you look at the story in my professional career, it's really moving from one place to another. On the advice of some friend in the target company who felt that that place will be more interesting and better for me to go over. And I trusted their advice and went over. So when people ask about, how do you plan your career and what do you want to do or what do you want to specialize in? And I think when I reflect back, I think what I had probably without knowing wanted was a nice culture where there are good people that I can engage with. And frankly, it didn't matter whether they were doing technology or analytics or finance or strategy. And that's what I think I have probably learned about myself, that I'm not so focused on the nature of work, but more on the context and the people. And if that is good, the work I think follows. So that's been my, I would say, professional journey, Shiv.
Oh, wonderful. Actually, I can see a lot of threads that have probably been common or running through right from the beginning. The way you were explaining it, I'll try to paraphrase and then let you respond and maybe build on that. See, right from this, the giant leap for mankind that you mentioned, many of your career transitions or role transitions seem to also be leaps of faith, because you said somebody felt that you could do it and then you had the confidence of getting in and doing that. So when you take such leaps of faith, there are also other associated aspects, particularly, I guess, in your current role, when you're running strategy, sometimes you probably have to take those leaps of faith. While you have gone through that yourself, has any of that helped you in bringing that kind of enthusiasm or the willingness to take risks, so to say, in the organization?
Yeah. So, I think it's interesting you say that, and I had not thought of it that way. But now when I reflect on that statement, I don't know whether I ever felt that I was taking a big risk, except Standard Chartered, where while, I was recommended to join that place, and Romy Malhotra, who was the boss who hired me, I didn't really know him. But all other places, there was a peer of mine or a close friend of mine who was there, and I said, yeah, if this guy says it's good for me, I mean, it better be good, or this fellow will help me out and all of that. So I never felt I was taking a big risk. I felt I'm just going to join a friend, and they will take care of me. So looks like it didn't appear risky at that point in time, except like I said, one time when I didn't know the guy. Plus I was moving from Delhi to Chennai, first time leaving Delhi. So that was a bit of a leap of faith, at least for my wife and children. In fact, we were expecting our second daughter. So she said, is this the right time for you to change the job? And that to move away, because I had to go alone and, stay there. So that was the only time I would say there was a bit of a leap of faith. But then I had heard good things, and there was enough data to sort of say that it should be okay. It should turn out to be okay. So many times I would say that these never appeared to be risk. And even today, I'm in a strategy job, and I take many decisions personally and professionally. And it's interesting. I don't know why. Nothing ever appears risky to me, because it seems to me that whatever I'm thinking, by and large, I think I'm right, it'll happen. If not, I'll figure it out. So there's never this, moment of worry that what if I fail? A lot of people say, don't you worry about failure? And I have no idea why it happened that way, but I have no worry about failure in general. And maybe because I have been lucky and I have not experienced any big failure, which gives me this unrequired confidence, and maybe one day it will get shattered. But in general, so far, it has always appeared that, yeah, this sounds good and we'll make it happen. And, what if it doesn't, then we'll figure something out, and that should be okay as well. So there's never a worry or a fear, Shiv. And now that you say it, I'm thinking about it. But
So if I didn't plant any seeds of confusion, I'm sure things are successful. Because one of the things that I've heard from many engineers when they become managers or when they need to take some of these roles where everything is not defined, there is a little bit of uncertainty or they are unsure about themselves, saying that unless I have all the details, which also manifests in the need for control or need for going down to the last level of detail, etc. So, how would you characterize your own leadership style?
I have to say that now that you say that, I think I thrive in chaos. So I love it when no one gives me a JD or a job definition. In fact, I generally don't like they give it to me because I know that when I get in there, I'll change it anyway. So my own view is that I have been hired to join a place to make a contribution to make the company successful and not necessarily the immediate role or the immediate boss. So my view is let me go figure out and see how I can make that contribution. And it may hopefully be going much beyond the JD. And of course, I don't want to be a vagabond and do any kind of thing, but then go back to my boss or whoever that is to say, you know what, I think I could do all of these things. Why are you limiting me into this JD that you thought I could do? I should obviously do that, but why not this and why not that? So my approach is to continue to challenge and say, what else can I do and how else can I do it and so on and so forth. So I actually do that and I enjoy that. In fact, someone told me, this is it and don't do something. I think I'll feel very claustrophobic and bored if that were to be the case. So I actually don't like a defined job or a defined goal or defined, because I think it is so much more enjoyable when you can define or co-define or jointly define and then get people together and do it.
Very nice. I can totally relate to that because I also probably share some of those traits. Easily get bored, not about doing things, saying the urge to learn something new or do something different. See, another thread which is also something interesting I found is when you talked about staying on campus in Gorakhpur days and within the factory campus, where you also mentioned that there were people from different states or different languages and different things that are there. Now, in the current role of, say, deploying strategy, which in itself is probably kind of vague or people understand it in different ways. What do you think is the relationship between another equally vague word, culture, organizational culture, and how do you kind of blend the two from a strategy deployment perspective?
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. Its culture is, very, very hard to define, sometimes also hard to determine. So my approach in general has been that I know my preferences, I know my sort of way of doing things and my culture, so to say. So I go all out to the entire ecosystem and share with them who I am, what I think, what I want to do, and how I think we can together make a win-win out of it. So almost, sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas. The last vishwas is very critical. Is my philosophy, although people who don't like Modi will say, why are you quoting him? But if you just take that statement, I think it's a wonderful statement if you think about, making a difference in a collaborative way. So that has been my approach, always. And it was just natural. Now that someone put phrases to it, I can say, oh yeah, I think I probably do that naturally, because it felt that if you do that, it is long term, it is sustainable, there's no conflict, everyone is happy. And it appeared to me that why would actually one not do that? It sounds so logical. It's not really a philanthropic activity or something that you do because someone wants you to do it. It just even from an engineering mind sounds extremely logical that if you do something where everyone is winning, everyone is trustworthy, then those relationships will be long lasting. You will all together make a bigger difference. So that has been my approach, that create the culture that you are around you. And hopefully, people who don't relate to it may reject you and they go away, and that's fine as well. So that's my approach, that, your network is what selects you. And that self-selection happens if you keep wearing your brand on your sleeve. And that's what I tend to do. So I do all kinds of talking. I share what I think, share what I'm doing, how I want to do things, all of that. And over time, the people who can relate to it will come closer. Who can't will go away, which is great, because then there's no conflict.
Yeah, I like the wonderful phrase that you use, the network selects you. So how do you go about building the network?
I don't. It builds on its own. So my job is to just like, think about a company branding itself on television. The customers who like them choose it. You don't have to go after a customer. The customer who believes in you will come to you. So to me, I don't care who you are. As long as you can relate to my values and beliefs, then you are with me. Otherwise, you are not. And that's how I look at it. So it's not as if I would choose to say, oh, you know what, I want Shiv in my network. No, I want X in my network who can relate to it. And if it happens to be Shiv, great.
So how do you carry the team with you? Not your direct reportees or your team, as a strategy officer, when you expect people to probably have a common purpose. Maybe in the campus analogy, everybody had the association to the factory and at least maybe what the impact the factory creates through the fertilizers. How do you create a similar sense here when most of our colleagues are all professionals who have more allegiance to their profession than to the organization?
So I think there are two, three things. One, knowing the strength of the team and knowing where the company is going, come up with a goal which is aspirational. I think smart people love to go after aspirational goals versus regular goals. Two, I think each individual has some strengths. So try to give them stuff that can leverage their strengths, and of course things that they can learn from. Also allow opportunities for diverse people to collaborate. So I'll say, what, X and Y, why don't you work together? And they will have complementary skill. They will learn from each other. They'll create something bigger than what they would do otherwise. And at times, giving them some other side projects which may not be relevant immediately for the company, but could be, it could be an extracurricular activity, saying, why don't you, help out in this running club or this new sort of session that we are trying to organize, or write a white paper on this, or why don't you give a talk on Bitcoin, or, whatever is your strength. So trying to see how each individual can sort of bring their whole self to work in as many different ways as possible. So I think that everyone enjoys when they can see that they are making a contribution, they are collaborating with others, together they are winning, making progress. So I just, retain a very informal, attitude at work. In fact, I don't think I'm a different person at work than at office. If those same people, I meet them socially also, they'll find the same thing, the way I talk, the way I engage, the way I do. So I'm just exactly the same person. And which I think people like, because many a time they think, oh, the official version is different and the personal version is different, and which one is which, all of that. I have just one version because I told people that it's very hard to keep version control. So I would rather have just one version so that I remember which one that is. Otherwise, I'll try to remember which version do you know and things of that nature. And given all these work and life and our social and professional networks are dated, my personal view also is that actually most people better emulate me, because they try to keep multiple versions, they themselves will get confused. And why do you actually want to have different versions? What purpose does it serve? I still haven't figured out. I know people have typically classified work as a different activity than life. And then there is this whole debate about how do you reconcile those two. For me, they have never been so distinctly different ever. And now to even less so. Because an easy example, I say that, if you take and we used to have that, take a look at my phone record and say, please reimburse my official calls. I can't differentiate, because some of those calls are made to my office people for personal reasons, and sometimes to personal friends for official reasons. And I won't remember which is which. So to me, my entire network is one. Whether you call it official or personal, I don't care to distinguish between those two. So I think that's who I am, because I think that all these identities or these silos that we create, whether it is our own identities related to our language or region or company or nation or whatever, those are all maybe nice somewhere, but frankly they're just means to an end to meet a larger good. So I think if you are focused on the largest good possible, all of these are, if they are relevant, please use it. I haven't found them too relevant really, if you ask me. So I don't wear any of those identities related to me. I mean, they are there because people look at it that way, but I don't spend too much time thinking about it. I think, to the extent I went to a college and I have an alumni network, and that's an identity, and that allows me to connect with a certain set of friends, great. But that's about it. I don't have any jingoistic feeling about any of those identities. They are conveniences which allow people to come together on a WhatsApp group, which is great, but nothing more than that.
Yeah, wonderful. Because this is probably what one also calls as being authentic. It's not about putting different faces or different versions, like you call it. And also similar to what I normally call this as a work-life blur. When someone asks for a work-life balance, there is no balance. I mean, balance means that something goes up, something comes down. It is not a trade-off. How can you kind of have everything as one big block? So I know that you also have a lot of other interests, than work. So how do you juggle your time? Is more about finding time to do those things, or probably expanding your network in different dimensions, if it were?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. In fact, even in the early days, I used to have a long to-do list, and books to read, or movies to see, or many of those things. And I don't know when that happened. I said, I'm always chasing something. There's always something that is left to do. So let me do the other way around. Let me develop a priority list of things that are important to me, and I'll do the top one, two, three. And if I get time, four, or if it doesn't, then it gets missed out. Just like, in the office, we say, focus on the big rocks, leave the small pebbles, all of that. So I said, I think we can do that in life. So when I thought about it, I think the number one priority that came forward was sleep. I realized that if I don't get 8 hours of sleep properly on a daily basis, I somewhere after a while feel unproductive and not good at all. So I said, wherever there's a choice, I will try to prioritize sleep first. I think the second thing that I realized that I enjoy doing is, I'm very curious. So I enjoy talking to people, listening to them and hearing them. I'm not so much of a reader or a viewer. If I have a live person, I tend to choose that person to talk to versus reading a more erudite text from someone who might be even more learned, because just the act of reading to me is very passive, but the act of engaging is far more active. So talking or engaging in a conversation is the number two topic. And by the way, in our office context, half the time you are meeting and engaging people, so that's happened. But even in my personal context, most of my free time is spent talking to people. Someone would have referred someone and said, hey, you know what, I've asked so and so to talk to you, why don't you chat? So I always say yes to any conversation from anyone. It doesn't matter who they are and why they want to talk, because I think I learn something, and in my own way, if I can contribute, why not? My other interests are more on the physical side, where I actually enjoy trekking and running and cycling, badminton, squash, those types of things. But those are also to me more group activities. So the run is actually a runversation. I will never run alone on my own. It will always be talking with someone. Cycling, same thing. I'm usually cycling with a group of people and we are chatting along the way and things like that. Badminton also, you can say that we are talking also while playing. So like I said, so physical activity is there, but not a quiet activity. It should be it should be engaging with people and things like that. So so those are the types of things where I spend time. So therefore the question is, then what do I not do? Because then I said, if I do all of these things, then so a lot of things that most people do, I don't do. Like I said, I don't watch TV, so I have no idea about news. I don't read newspapers. I pretty much don't read books, which are quite unnatural. I have no idea what is happening in cricket, who's the captain, who's winning. I don't even know what's happening in squash, badminton, or running either. I said, if I have time, I'll go run and play. Why would I want to worry about who's winning and what time? It doesn't matter to me. So I have made my life simple to say, these are the things important to me. I'll focus on it, and the rest will fall by the wayside, and that's fine. And then, of course, the question in people's mind is, oh, then you'll become in a silo. You will not know what's happening today, and news. Because earlier, I used to read 3 newspapers, I would read magazines, I'll read books, and now it's all gone. And now I say that I actually, through all those conversations that I'm having, I think I'm getting what I need. Because everyone knows this, and they'll tell me, oh, so by the way, you may not have seen it. Yesterday, such and such happened. I say, oh, great, thanks. So in all my conversation, all my networks know that I don't see anything, and I'm actually relying on them to tell me. So they're quite gracious enough to tell me that, by the way, someone won a match, or something happened in politics, or some controversy happened. And to me, by and large, all these news items are at some level noise. It's not a signal half the time. So I'm quite happy to not gather. There are a few things that I read. There's a magazine called The Economist, which I've been a subscriber for the last 20 years. It's a weekly newspaper in my mind. I browse through it, despite what some of my friends feel about its ideological orientation. But I like that magazine. I do read some blogs. I will once in a while read a book also. These days I have discovered Audible. So there are 2-3 Audible books I have read or heard. Upanishad and Sapiens, and now a book called Genes by Siddharth Mukherjee. So anything, someone recommends it's a great book. So in my free time, there's very little of it. I keep hearing it. So therefore, many things that I would say that my friends spend time on, I don't, because sleep and chatter and physical activity pretty much consumes all the time that I have.
Talking of time, I didn't realize that we've been talking for about half an hour. And normally try to keep the episodes around this time. But I would still like to ask you one of my favorite questions, which I ask every guest, which I think is relevant for many of our listeners, which is related to career. What would be your thoughts or advice, suggestion, whatever you call them, for 2 segments of people? One who may be considering entering IT today, and the second segment is those people who are typically in their midlife crisis or career. When they're just about to become managers or they're doing something now, they don't know what they should do further.
So a few thoughts on that, and this has obviously become far more critical in the recent past when things are changing so fast and the job market is also going down. So this question has been, coming up, and since I again talk to a lot of people across age groups, across sectors, here are a few things that I have distilled in my head, which I share with people. One is for the early career people. I think in our generation we focused a lot on working for a multinational, because those days we were globalizing was creating a lot of opportunities. Multinational companies were obviously superior to Indian companies. They provided great opportunities to people like us who really saw great career growth, good learning, good compensation, all of those things. I think the future next generation, my daughter who just starts her job on Monday, so it's her birthday, and it's, I think, yeah, and it's her professional birthday also. so she's going to start her job. So for her generation, I say a few things which I think will be different from ours. That multinationals may not be the best bet for their generation, because we will probably deglobalize. Plus, I think that the Indian economy will grow very rapidly. Lots of opportunity will come up in the domestic market, and so on and so forth. So my personal view is that multinationals in India, selling to Indian companies may not necessarily have a great advantage over Indian companies. So why would you not consider Indian companies? Multinationals who are serving, global operations will have a, limited role to play. So if our economy grows from 2.5, 3 trillion to 20 trillion, my guess is it will be a lot more domestic growth driven, and therefore focused on Indian companies who are going to create those opportunities, and therefore don't ignore that, focus on that. And I think people are doing that. So that's one, that don't be mindless about multinationals. Second, many of my friends went abroad. Again, I'm not 100% sure, for the same reason that going abroad is a sure shot great way. One, deglobalization, one, differential economic growth. Why would you not want to be an economy which grows from 3 to 20 versus which is already at 20, might become 25, 30, and we don't know how the situation will be on the employment front over there. So one is, don't prioritize going to the US or working for a multinational. That our generation, there was slam dunk. We had to do it, and we did it, and we were right. I think that has probably changed. Second, I think we gave a lot of focus on loyalty to a company or an industry. I think in our time, growth was slow. So the only the surrogate to know how good you are and how you contributed was longevity. That if you stayed long, you can make a bigger contribution. That was all. Now you can make a contribution in a year. Work is so fast, and these digital economies, you can in 1 year a company can go from X to Y. So I wouldn't be surprised that from now 10 years later, I look back and I find a CV of a person who has actually changed 5 or 6 jobs in those 10 years. And maybe he or she was outgrowing each of those jobs and going into the next gig because that company did not provide an opportunity, versus some other person who stayed 10 years with the same company, and that same company probably had suboptimal growth. I would probably choose the first person, saying, hey, you were really smart. You were making a contribution and the company didn't give you opportunity. You want to know the next gig, did more, versus the other one who was constrained by the growth of the company. So I think this whole concept of company loyalty is more likely to flip, and we might actually like more people who have changed jobs versus today when we are liking people who have not changed jobs. So I think a lot of things that we have in our head taken for granted that these are the ways to think about things, I think they will all flip on the opposite extreme. And many of us are not ready to see it that way. So I think the last thing that I will say is what I shared with my daughter, which was the 5C framework 3 years ago when she went to college. And I was asked to give her some advice on a similar lesson. And I said, let me look at 3 macro trends based on which I will tell you what are the things I see which are going to be in short supply. And since short supply things will be hopefully in high demand, you acquire those 3 characteristics and you'll be good. And she was studying economics, which is the reason for using an economic framework to give her the 3C framework. So the first C was related to globalization leading to deglobalization, and therefore compassion being in short supply. People are becoming more selfish. So I think if you are more compassionate, you will be an outlier, and hopefully that will be good for you. The second thing is that, there were so many choices now. Earlier, we had only 2 choices, very binary: Ambassador, Fiat, Colgate, Foreign's, Lambretta, Ambassador, whatever. So today they have hundreds of choices. So they are all confused. They suffer from ADHD, all of those types of things. So I think conviction, which is belief in yourself, is in short supply today. And the third C is really creativity, because in the linear world, you could do continuous improvement, but in a non-linear world, creativity is in short supply. So really compassion, hopefully giving right to your own conviction, leading to creativity. And then 2 years later, when she forgot this framework, I added 2 more C's. At the beginning, I added curiosity, and at the end, I added communication. And I justified by saying, if you're curious, hopefully you'll become compassionate. Hopefully that compassion will lead you to some conviction about what you want to do, and that could lead to some creative output, which when communicated can fuel the virtuous cycle of curiosity. So that is the framework that I shared with her. And then I said, what? This framework works for me, works for everyone else. It's not just for you. Yeah. Why would we all not do that? And maybe on a deeper reflection, I felt that maybe I was just telling her what I probably do. Many a times, all these frameworks we create based on our own personal innermost feeling without realizing it. So I was probably just throwing at her what I had always done and stood for. So that is something that I have started to feel that is a good way to think about it. And I tell people that maybe this is not for you, but maybe you do your own thinking, develop your own framework, which works for you. So I would think that, the future is going to be very different from the past, and people should not go based on the frameworks which were there in the early days, and determine what will work for them. And extreme experimentation is required. And you spoke about midlife crisis. I think all of those people, and I'm part of them, we grew up in a very deterministic era. We were rewarded for problem solving. You solve the problem, you get 100 marks. But today, problem definition is the issue. What if I gave a maths paper and said, tell me the 5 problems that maths should solve? Okay, now solve it. I will give you half the marks for the first one. Many people won't know what problems maths can solve and which are the important problems to solve, and similarly for everything else. So my view is that, the solution space will be automated by AI ML. Problem state is where the value will get created, but we are not training people to define the right problem which is worth solving. And we have been rewarding people for solutioning, which I think is becoming free. There's a website called Kaggle, and I tell people that if I have a complex problem, I'll put it on Kaggle. A Hungarian scientist in his free time will solve for free. So why do I need you to solve that problem and pay you anything? I'll get all the solutions. But you tell me what's worth solving in this context. So that's what I think that the people who are here have been operating in a deterministic, order-taking world where the future was predictable. But the world we all know has become agile. But the mindset has not become agile. And agile to me is a growth mindset where you are creating what the future holds for you. So I do think that it's a tough one. People will have to unlearn and let go of many of those things that have become part of the muscle memory. And I don't think it's easy. We all know anything which has become muscle memory over 15, 20 years is hard to let go. But the more you start thinking about it, realizing it, experimenting with it, hopefully you will get somewhere. So maybe not a great answer for someone who's now thinking how to change career, but I think it's all in the mind. And for the newcomers, I also say that don't always remain a job seeker. Try to be a job creator. If the economy has to grow so fast, some people have to create jobs also. So maybe you are the one.
Yeah, nicely summarized. I think very relevant for not only these times, and I can also relate to many of the things that you said. So that's about all the time we have for this episode. And I'm sure there'll be opportunities for continuing the conversation in another episode, or at least we'll catch up in slightly better times for coffee, or I don't cycle, so maybe some other activity that we can do together and talk. Yeah.
I have many a times summarized as a last statement in some of these chats to say to people, Ja Simran Jile Apni Zindagi. And this is a tagline from a movie which basically says that you figure it out what you are good at. Don't rely on other people. So I think that's what I think the world expects from us, because so many things are so uncertain, and we all have to develop that inner confidence to experiment and figure it out, versus relying on other people telling us, which was possible in a more deterministic, linear, straightforward world. So that's what I would like to end with. Ja Simran Jile Apni Zindagi.
Nicely summarized. Thanks, Pankaj.
Okay, Shiv. Thank you.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Malavika for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
please subscribe on your favorite podcast client
and spread the word in your network.
If you'd like to share your story,
contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.